The curious case of the Don Anderson poll. Yes, my friends, my subscribers, yes, my viewers, have I got something that we need to bring to your attention, and we're going to do a little reasoning and see what conclusions we come to. We are going to take a further look at the Don Anderson poll. And what we're looking at is the way in which Don Anderson treats with performance and favorability polling. And we are going to need to, have to take a trip down memory lane. And we are going to therefore get into our time machine and mosey on down the road to see what we find. Well, until such time, let me first welcome you to Jamaica 411. Thank you so much for stopping by, coming to keep me company as usual. If you're here with me for the first time, welcome, welcome. Please subscribe, like the video, share, and feel free to leave your comments in the comment section. To my subscribers and regular viewers, welcome back. It's always lovely to have you, and especially in the comments section. I see you there all the time, and I do try to respond to you as well. And of course, you know the ropes. You're going to give the video a thumbs up from now on, because you know when you come to Jamaica 411, it's quality stuff you're getting, and therefore you may want to do so that you are not disturbed later on in the video when we are getting down to business. You also may share. I'd like you to share and then rejoin me, and then now you can hear what it is that I have to say today. I am going to give you the benefit of my opinion, and I sure hope you'll also give us the benefit of yours, what you think about these things that I'll be showing you today. And of course, I thank you in advance. Let's now get down to business. So I said to myself, I said Don Anderson polling performance, good, very good, average, poor, and very poor. And of late, you notice that Mark Golding's, performance rating, favorability rating has suddenly surged with no apparent reason why it should be so, because he's no more likable today than he was then, and no more trustworthy today than he was then. So what has caused it? Well, we knew for some time that they were adding to the good and very good, the average. And his average is usually high. In the case of Andrew Holness, his good and very good is the one that was running up into the 30% and so on, the average, and then the poor, right? His poor has been increasing, and the average, but what we're not sure about is what is happening to the good and very good, because Don Anderson poll, which is largely PNP Commission poll, they do not break out and tell you what the good, very good, the average, and the negatives are. Not lately. The last time it was done, as far as I can remember, was last year, September, when Don Anderson was commissioned by, according to him, some business people, right? It was about in September, yes. After the poll was done by RGR, and in the poll that was done that September, it had Mark Golding, the Englishman, polling good and very good at 14.5%. The June before, he was at 12%. If you recall, at that time, Don Anderson made a sterling effort to claim that Mark was 70-odd% or 60-odd%. Andrew was 70-odd%, and Mark was gaining. It was when he went on Cliff Hughes' program and Cliff Hughes asked him, what's the breakout? He went and gave the breakout, and it turned out that Mark was polling good and very good at 12%. Now what has happened is them definitely not giving you the breakout, not Dan Anderson and not the PNP. So they are now producing polls that are telling you that his positive ratings are and Andrew's positive ratings are, but they're not telling you what the positive ratings mean, if the average is included. And since they are telling you positive and negative but not telling you what the average is, then we can safely assume that the average is counted in the positive. Obviously, we can come to the conclusion fairly reasonably, without any fear of being contradicted, that had the poll had Mark Golding's good and very good up into the 20s and 30s, that is what they would have shown us. And they would have shown us what it is that Andrew's one was, if that was the case. Clearly, that is not the case. And I have a strong feeling that what is really happening is that it's good and very good. Instead of going up, it has plummeted. But because we're in the resistance, whenever we see him plummet, we start to take all kind of liberty with him, saying that he need to go in an attraction and he's a drag on the party that we all love, right? So they now come up with this trick to try and give the impression now that Mark is now polling higher than Andrew, right? Can you imagine? This after his deception with the fact that he's not Jamaican, my British citizen, and sit down in our parliament illegally. He's saying that Jamaican people love him now, because he's illegal and sitting down in our parliament illegally, and him deceive them and him telling them things that are not true, and now they love him. That's what they're trying to tell us. But if the good and the very good ratings were rivaling Andrew Holness's good and very good ratings, which the last time we saw that it was at 26, I believe, point something, 0.3, then we would have seen the breakout like that, and they know that they will be on to something, and we would have to be shut up. We have to shut up, right? In the resistance and others, when we're talking about the man having attraction and need to go because him can't win nothing. Therefore, we can only wonder as to the reason why they're not showing us the breakout at all. It is clearly a policy of the party not to reveal that information, and clearly Don Anderson has been forbidden from doing any such thing. And they're putting out deceptive information as usual, trying to make out that somehow Mark Golding is above Andrew Holness without giving us the full sum of the polling that was done. So this trip in memory lane now is going to go back to look at one or two instances when performance polls were conducted by Don Anderson and see how it was that he was polling then, and how they were classifying the poll then. Were they adding the average to the good and very good and then claim that they are positive? Were they adding it to the negative, very poor and poor, or did they just ignore it? So we're going to take a look, and then we're going to ask some very serious questions if we find out anything untoward, right? If there is a difference between how Don Anderson has been interpreting his poll today and how the polls were being interpreted in yesteryears. And then he now is going to have to explain himself as to why he is a party to any change in the way he is polling, or let him explain to us why he has changed the way he has been interpreting these polls. So, without further ado, let us go and have a peek and see how Don Anderson poll was being interpreted in the past. Great. So you are looking at here a poll finding that was published in the Gleaner. This is the Gleaner archives. Very good place to go and get info. April 29 in the year 2000. The PNP was still in government. PJ Patterson was the Prime Minister. Edward Seaga was the leader of the opposition. And this was a performance rating for the Jamaica Labour Party. And as this says, JLP's performance gets failing grade. Jamaicans have given the performance of the opposition Jamaica Labour Party a failing grade according to results of a poll commissioned by the Gleaner. Now, the Gleaner used to commission a lot of polls from Don Anderson. After Carl Stone died, Don Anderson more or less had the, how should I put it? He really had the free ground to go on, and the Gleaner was the one that was commissioning him mainly. Almost everything they want to know, then commission him to go ask people, right? If the government does something, then commission him to go ask people. So he did a lot of poll, and the Gleaner was the one that was commissioning him up to a certain period. When I started to look in modern times, between 2011 and 2024, I could hardly find, a matter of fact, I never found any. Because by that time, the Gleaner was doing the poll, but it was through the television, but they never published. They published lately because those who commissioned the poll sent the result to them to print. You follow? But at this time here in 2000 before, I saw up to 94. I think it was around in 94, the first poll I saw. Good. So, let me go on. The poll, conducted by experienced pollster Don Anderson and his team from Market Research Services Limited, was done between March 10 and 23 across the island's 14 parishes and involved interviews with just over 1,000 persons 18 and over. It has a margin of error of plus or minus 3.2%. This is them interpreting the poll now. Close to 60% of all persons interviewed said that the opposition JLP was doing either a poor job or a very poor job as the official opposition in the country. Remember, the NDM was about. So let us look now over at the statistics we're looking at. Poor, you see where it says poor and very poor? You add that up and you get 69%. What them say? 60? 50? Oh, my bad. Yes, so it's 58, 59%, right? And it probably is some margin. So then round it up to 60. All right, so we now know that what they're referring to as poor and very poor is what they're referring to as poor and very poor, not average. Let us continue. The ratings means that despite the fact that very few persons felt the government was doing a good job, we're going to read what them say about the PNP, right? The government. Even fewer felt this way about the opposition, said Mr. Anderson. Just 11.2% rated the performance of the Jamaica Labour Party as being good, compared to 17.2% who rated the People's National Party government positively. So you can see here in the Gleaner's interpretation of the data before them, they said 11.2% rated the performance of the JLP opposition as being good, right? So let's look at the chart. What is it that we see over there that adds up to 11.2%? Very good, which is 1.6%, plus good, which is 9.6%, and when you add that up, you get 11.2. So in terms of how the positives that the people may have towards the opposition, it was only the good and the very good that was being added here, not the average, right? And we can clearly see that. But let me continue, because maybe they add the average somewhere else. Let me read on. Strongest critics of the JLP performance were older persons over 55 years, where close to 78% said the JLP's performance was poor, right? And that's the end of it. So, yes, He was taking polls in those days for the average, but the average was never considered. Why? Because average means average. Average is neither good and it is neither poor, so it is not to be regarded at all. What they should be doing when they're doing these polls is force the people to give an answer as to whether the performance is good or bad, and just take out the average out of it. So you give them 4 questions. How do you rate the performance of the party or the person? Good, very good, poor, very poor, and force them to answer one of those, and it would have solved the problem. So in 2000, we know that it was standard for the Gleaner to interpret the findings of Don Anderson, not including the average, but taking only into consideration what the respondents say are good, very good, poor, or very poor. Right? We can clearly see that. Okay, great. So this now was the Don Anderson poll result for the government at the time, and this one was the one that was alluded to in the JLP performance rating poll that I just read for you. Now this one says government gets poor performance rating. Now this is 3 years after the 97 election and 2 years before the other one is due. And it says, very few persons think that the government is currently doing a good job in running the country. This is one of the findings from a recent poll conducted on behalf of the Gleaner company by Don Anderson and his team from Market Research Services Limited. The poll was conducted over the period March 10 to 23, 2000, and involved interviews with just over 2,000 persons aged 18 years and over in all parishes. The sample was representative of the national population in terms of age, gender, and socio-economic group. Let me read that again. The sample was a representative of the national population in terms of age, gender, and socio-economic group. The sample error was plus or minus 3.2. Now, what you think they meant by that? It meant that if you have 51% female and 49% male, then in the sample group, they try and find 51% females, or make sure that the persons who are responding are 51% female and 49% male. If the vast majority of the people are poor, like 80%, they try and find persons who may fit into that category, and they will go and interview some shop keepers and 1 or 2 rich people and that sort of thing. So they try and get the views of a representation of the entire society in this 1,000, right? So if we have like 3% or 1% very rich, then 1% of the 1,000 will be very rich. If say 60 or 80% were poor people, then that is how they would do it. So that is what they meant. I don't know what they're doing now, because they're certainly not telling us that this is how they are selecting people. So this is very interesting. Anyway, let me continue. A significant number of persons rated the performance of the government as being either poor, 25.5%, or very poor, 21%, so that nearly half of the persons interviewed do not think much of the government's performance to date. So let me see if we can do little maths. 25.5 plus 21% is, let me see, 46.5%. Let's have a look. Let's have a look now at the statistics. You see where it says poor and very poor? Yes, and you see it says strong negatives. They add it up for us and says 46.5%. So you see that included in the poor and very poor is not the average. But let us continue and see if they were adding the average to the good and very good and saying that those are positives. Let's read on. It says here, question. Speaking of the PNP government now, how would you rate the performance of the government to date? You see, even in those days, the question that was asked of the persons, they publish it. The question that was asked is exactly the question that they publish. This is known as a transparent polling. This is a transparent polling, meaning you know the question that was asked, and so therefore you can judge whether or not the question was, well, match the interpretation that they are putting on the poll, right? Quite unlike what is happening with the Don Anderson poll these days. You are not seeing the question that was asked. You're being given a summary of what it was that was asked. When asked, how do you feel about the government? That is not the question. Tell us the question that was asked, right? And then after they said that is what they asked now. Or how would you vote? Or how do you intend to vote? You understand? And then now they come and tell you now that the people said I'm going to vote this way, I'm going to vote that way, when you don't know what question was asked, whether or not that was a question that was asked or some other question, because certainly that was definitely not the question that was asked. So here, in these polls that Don Anderson was producing and the Gleaner was commissioning, they gave you the question, the direct question that was asked and the responses that was received. Let us continue. The largest single figure in this evaluation, 34.8%, rated the government's performance as being average, right? So that's 34.8. So they mentioned the average this time. The country then does not seem to be overly impressed with the performance of the PNP government to date. It is significant to note that strongest critics of the performance of the PNP government are the young persons within the population, where against the background of a 46.5% negative rating overall, close to 63% of the persons between the ages 18 to 24 rate the performance negatively. So see, they're telling you now of the 46.5% negative rating. Let us look now at the chart that they have here. Yes, they say poor, very poor, and you see strong negatives, 46.5. So of that 46.5%, 63 of the young people give the government of the day's performance a negative rating. Let me continue. Conversely, strongest support for the PNP administration comes from the older persons within the population, where over 35% feel that they are doing a good job. This compared to 18.2% overall who feel this way. So there is no doubt about it. The average is not counted as part of the positives. When you talk about the positives of the opposition or the government, they were talking about the good and very good. They never included the average. All right? Low-income persons comprising the bulk of the electorate appear to be consistent with the overall average, with 48% rating the performance as being either poor or very poor, and 19% rating it as very good or to good. So there you have it. All right, that's the second evidence. We're going to go now and see what else we'll find. Here we are again looking at the Don's poll. This one now is dated January 29, 2002. And it says parties get poor ratings. So parties now would be the PNP and the JLP that is represented here. Large numbers of Jamaicans have rated the performance of the governing People's National Party and the opposition Jamaica Labour Party as either poor or very poor. So people were not satisfied, and that was the election year in 2002. The findings are contained in a poll conducted between January 10 and 21 by pollster Don Anderson on behalf of the Gleaner. A total of 1,105 persons were interviewed island-wide in 56 different communities. The margin of error is plus or minus 3.1%. Responding to the question, and you see here again the Gleaner is telling you what question was asked, how would you rate the performance of the PNP as a government at this time? 26% of those interviewed said very poor, and 21.4% said poor. This means that some 47.4% of those interviewed had negative views about how government has performed to date. You hear that? So it is the poor and very poor that they are considering to be negative views. Nothing to do with average. All right. Another 26% of those interviewed felt that the party had performed very good or just good, while 26.2% felt the party's performance was average. Now let's see if them added it in, right? Now let's go to the statistics. You see the question, rating the parties. The first column, that is how would you rate the performance of the PNP as the government at this time? And the second question, how would you rate the performance of the JLP as the opposition at this time? So on the left, you see they put very good, just good, and then below that, you see that big type that says total positive. So those are what, those two items are what they refer to as positives. Then you have the average, and then look now whether or not they added the average in with the negative. Let's see. So they say for the PNP 21.4 good, poor, and 26 very poor. When you add that up, you get 47.4, and as you can see, the total is 47.4. So the average is not added in, either the total positive or the total negative. It just steady, right? Great. So this now is showing us how it is that the polls were being interpreted at that time, the questions that were asked, and at no time at all in the polling history of Don Anderson poll was the average considered as part of either positive or negative. You see that for yourself. Great. So let us now fast forward, jump back in our time machine, and let's get back now to the present and see what is happening with the Don Anderson poll, if it's the same or they have changed. And then we have a question or two from us done. Right. So here we go. This now is a Gleaner article published on October 3, 2023. And it is entitled Creditable Performance Ratings for Wholeness Golding. And this, of course, is a Don Anderson poll. He changed the way he was polling the question asked, using a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is a very low number and 5 is a very high number. How would you rate the performance of the Prime Minister, and how would you rate the performance of the opposition leader? I don't know why they keep starting with the negatives first. Anyway, it says for very poor, 18.6%, that's wholeness, while Mark Golding's very poor is 21.3. Poor for wholeness is 15.2. Poor for Mark Golding is 26.1. For average for wholeness is 37.4, and average for Mark Golding is 38.2. Now when it comes to the good and very good, good for wholeness is 19.2, and for Mark Golding is 10.3. And when it comes to very good, Andrew Holness polled 9.6, Mark Golding 4.2. So you can see from this information so far that when it comes to the very poor, poor, and average, in these three instances, Mark Golding is leading, right? When it comes to the good and very good, Andrew Holness is leading. He has, based on this figure, 19.2 plus 9.6. That should give us 28.8 I want you to pay attention to that now, right? 28.8%. While if you add up Mark Golding's 10.3 and 4.2, you get 14.5% good and very good. So Andrew was doubling him more or less. All right? Good. Let's see now how the Gleaner chose to interpret the data. Now I want you to particularly listen to their choice of words. All right? So I'm going to begin. Prime Minister Andrew Holness and opposition leader Mark Golding have again met the pass mark in their stewardship of the government and parliamentary opposition, though with lower grades when compared to last year. The latest RGR Gleaner commissioned polls have determined. You heard that, right? Pass mark. Now, when we were going to school, I don't know what's happening nowadays, and I've been out of school for a very long time, right? I used to know pass mark to be 50%, right? And as I recall, the good and very good was 28.8% for Andrew Holness and 14.5% for Mark Golding. So exactly how does that become pass mark? Let's continue. They went on to say Holness, who is midway through his second term in office since 2016, received the thumbs up from 66.2% of the 1,010 adult Jamaicans surveyed by the Don Anderson-led Market Research Services Limited in terms of his performance in office. You see that? Now, how did they arrive at that 66.2%? Let's read on. A breakdown shows 28.8% of Jamaicans believe that the Prime Minister is doing a good job, and they break it out for us. 19.2% said he was doing good, a very good job, which is 9.6%. And when you add them together, you get the 28.8%, right? But then listen to this. And 37.4% acknowledge that his performance is average. So you're seeing here now, they're adding the average, because when you add that 37.4 to the 28.8, you get the 66.2 that they call pass mark. So what they never did in the past, they never added the average. It was never counted in. You see it now that they're adding the average to it. Now, we may say, ooh, well, yeah, but all right, let's go on and see what could be the reason why they have suddenly decided to change. Or is there that they don't know what they're doing? Is it possible? Let me continue though. In contrast, 33.8% believe that Holness is performing below average, and 18.6% rating him as a very poor steward, and 15.2% saying he is a poor performer. And when you add those two together, you get the 33.8. Now, for the opposition leader who has been in the position for 3 years, 52.7% of Jamaicans polled across all parishes believes he has performed creditably, with 14.5% rating his performance as good, 10.3%, or very good, 4.2%, which adds up to the 14.5. At the same time, Golding's performance in office was found to be average by 38.2% of respondents. So there you have it. They imagine, he's good and very good, 14.5%, but the average is very high. So they added the average in order to get him past 50%, to give the impression that the Jamaican people are impressed. Now, we need to ask a question, and the Gleaner needs to provide an answer. Why is it that it has suddenly changed the way it is interpreting the data? Why this sudden about turn? why it is all of a sudden, after 30 years of interpreting the Don Anderson poll, suddenly in 2 years they decide to change the way they are interpreting the poll and adding the average. Is there a reason for that? So now we come to the $1,000,000 question. Why has the Gleaner changed its method for interpreting the data of the Dan Anderson poll? Why? Second question. Why is the Gleaner carrying the People's National Party's interpretation of the poll? Because it is they who have an interest in interpreting the poll the way in which it is being interpreted, or at any rate, Dayton Campbell is interpreting it. And then the Gleaner is following suit and other people following suit. And whenever they come up with these polls, instead of putting it in one paper or one media, they send it to Loop News, they send it to RGR, they send it to NNN, they send it to the Gleaner. They're clearly using these polls as a kind of a means to sell a man who is unsaleable. We've always said that Mark Golding is unmarketable. So they are using the polls, and based on the results they get from the field, they are putting a spin on the poll in order to make Mark look good. The question is, again, to the Gleaner, why are they carrying the PNP's narrative? Why have they changed their method of interpreting the poll and adopted one of the political parties? And you think it's a joke? I am going to show you something now. As you can see, this is a Gleaner news headline. Golding closes in on wholeness poll, and it was published in the Instagram on June 27, 2023. And you can see the date in the bottom left corner. It says June 27, 2023. Now I want you to take particular close look at the photograph. Now you will recall that this was a poll where they combined the good, very good, and average to be at 53.2%. Let me read it for you. The latest Don Anderson poll has found that 54.5% of Jamaicans have a positive view of Prime Minister Andrew Holness, while 53.2% of them have a positive view of opposition leader Mark Golding. And then they said that the poll was commissioned by the PNP. Now, here is the thing. This is showing, according to them, when they went and did the poll and interpreted it in a different way than they normally do, they combined the average with the good and the very good and had it that Andrew Holness was at 54.5% and Mark Golding was less at 53.2%. Yet, I wanted to look at the photograph that you're looking at. First thing you see, look at the photograph they show for Mark Golding and look at the photograph they show for Andrew Holness. Let me bring it closer so you can see what I'm talking about. Look at that photograph for Andrew Holness and look at the one for Mark Golding and compare. That's the first thing. Second thing is, Andrew Holness is leading in the poll and he is the Prime Minister, but look at where they place him in relation to Mark Golding. They put him behind Mark Golding. The picture is a terrible picture and Mark Golding is a nice picture and he's in the front, right? Even though he's not leading. Now, this is what you call, well, we call it activism, because it seems as if the Gleaner has selected and picked a side. They did it before in the past, in the 70s, right? When they were on one side, the Labour Party side, then you had JBC on the PNP side, and then RGR, of course, is where you go and get your news when you want news, right? When you want propaganda, you go check the other two. So it appears as though the Gleaner has resumed its activism and selected a side. Now, the question is, why select the PNP this time around? Why select the PNP this time around? Is it because Mark Golding and Peter Bunting are capitalists? Is it because Mark Golding is a Jew? Is it because he is white? What is the reason why the PNP is now favored by the Gleaner over the Jamaica Labour Party? Is there something in it? You see, there has to be a reason that they want Mark Golding to be there and not Andrew Holness. Not that there's anything wrong with people having their own political views, but when you're going to use an old and established newspaper like the Gleaner in order to take sides in the politics, especially in circumstances where they now control RGR and the television station calling itself TVJ these days. I mean, this is just plain out and out activism. Activism in the same way in which you have people in the PNP who are PNP activists, and you have people in the Labour Party who are JLP activists. The Gleaner is now a Mark Golding activist. It certainly isn't a PNP activist, but it surely is a Mark Golding activist. And does it have anything to do with the fact that little Joe Matalan came out and endorsed Mark Golding? Furthermore, as a reminder, you remember that young lady who worked in Mark Golding's office as some kind of policy advisor, the one who fed her dog Patty? You remember that one? Isn't she supposed to be little Joe Matalan's daughter that was working in the OLO's office? I seem to recall that it is so. And what is it that he is? What position he holds at the Gleaner? Chairman, I do believe. So he can't escape responsibility for the tainting of the Gleaner as a political activist now. And therefore, when it comes to anything, any commentary, any article, any opinion that is in the Gleaner, well, I don't know about you, but I certainly will now take them as a pinch of salt because I cannot be quite sure if what I'm getting is news or propaganda. Anyway, folks, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me and keeping me company. Thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, and leaving your comments. So until next time, take good care of yourselves and walk good.